All right. Wow. Had to improvise a little bit today.
So official.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Press Club, the place where news happens. My name is Emily Wilkins. I am the current president of the National Press Club and a DC correspondent for CNBC. Thank you so much for joining us, both of you who are here at the National Press Club as well as on C-SPAN, for our Headliners event with actors and producers Chris Evans and Mark Kassen, the founders of A Starting Point, a nonpartisan video-based civic engagement forum. We are happy to accept your questions, and I'll ask as many as time permits. If you'd like to submit a question, please email headliners, that's HEADLINERS @press.org, and put starting point in the subject line. And for our C-SPAN and radio audiences, please be aware that in the audience today are members of the general public, so any applause or reaction you hear is not necessarily from the working press, who are also here today, and we're so happy to have them. It is now my pleasure to introduce the distinguished head table. Please stand up when your name is called. Starting on my right, Maya Lene Bura, the general assignment producer for PBS NewsHour. Manu Meal, the CEO. We got to get through everyone. If we can save the applause for the end, much appreciated. Manu Meal, the CEO for Bridge USA. Cheska Antonelli, the editor-in-chief for Bloomberg Government. Donna Leinwan-Leger, the president of DC Media Strategies, the 2009 National Press Club president, and the co-leader of our Headliners team. Then we have Lori Russo, the president of Staten Communications, and the co-lead for our headliner and the organizer of today's event. And to my left, we'll start with Kayla Minton, the senior vice president for A Starting Point. Mia Charity, the president of the Close Up Foundation. Dulce Smith-Barrow, the education editor for Politico. Gabriella Border, with U.S. National Affairs correspondent for Reuters. Eileen O'Reilly, the managing editor of Standards and Training for Axios and the immediate past National Press Club president. And Ted Johnson, the DC correspondent for Deadline. Go ahead and applaud now.
Yeah,
Now's
we can
a
get
good
it
time.
out.
Yes.
That's good.
So if you spend any time on social media these days, you might be surprised from the findings in a recent survey by Georgetown University's Institute of Politics and Public Service. While the country is politically polarized as ever, surprise, surprise, 94% of voters agreed that, quote, respect for each other is the first step in having a government that works, and 89% of voters agreed that civility is the language of respect. Yet, research also shows that most Americans believe that political discourse in the United States has become less respectful and less fact-based. This year, with more than 40 million Gen Z voters eligible to vote in the presidential election, including 8.3 million first-time voters, it is more critical than ever to ensure that these young adults get the information they need to make the best decisions at the polls. At the same time, a lot of our traditional sources for unbiased, fact-based news and coverage are under strain. This has resulted in growing news deserts across the country. Actor and producer Chris Evans, best known for his role as Captain America in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Mark Kassen, a Global Globe and Emmy-nominated filmmaker, playwright, and actor. And tech entrepreneur, long bio. And tech entrepreneur Joe Kiani stepped into addressing the challenge with the founding in 2020 of A Starting Point. The mission? To create a bipartisan channel of communication and connectivity between Americans and their elected officials with the goal of creating a more informed electorate. This year, A Starting Point is launching an election year campaign to prepare young voters with information, resources, and engagement opportunities. And today, we're so eager to hear more about A Starting Point, the latest campaign and your plans to reach millions of Gen Z voters. Please join me in a very warm Press Club welcome to Chris Evans and Mark Kassen.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
So I think just to kick things off, we got to start with the one big question, which is that obviously you two have both had very successful careers in Hollywood. Why come to DC? Why begin something like A Starting Point?
Foolishness, I think.
Yes.
Really,
True naivete.
I don't know. I like Dunning-Kruger is what it is. I think we thought we could help shine a light on certain issues and create more civic engagement. I mean, we each have our own individual social medias. We have our own individual opinions, but that only reaches a certain amount, and I think we both felt that more good could come from creating a mechanism, a platform where it's about engagement, it's about education, demystifying issues to create a government that more accurately reflects who we are. Because if you have half of the country not voting and not using their voice, how can you ever have a government that understands where we're going? So it felt, you know, as much as I like getting on social media and spouting off my own opinions, you realize that's only doing so much. And this felt like a more effective way to use our platforms.
And to be fair, we didn't mean to do all of this. We kind of had, we had a very, I mean, Chris originally had a very narrow idea, which was,
All right.
I'm a little embarrassed that I don't know the definition of some of these things, like NAFTA or whatever. Not specifically NAFTA, you may have known what that was.
I did know.
I don't, and you know, let's get the horses, let's hear it from the horse's mouth. Let's get 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats to originally answer and define each of these things. And as we began talking to them, we realized that it was kind of a unique channel of communication we were opening up, and it seemed a shame if we didn't use that to hear more from these folks, and then to begin to unpack some of the stuff that we were experiencing for the audience that we happened to be able to throw it towards. And then hopefully, quite frankly, and I think it's important to say, you know, we're very conscious that we're not reporters or news. You know, we create a platform of information so that people can go, quite frankly, to where you all work and really dive deeper. So, you know, it started very small, and then we couldn't help ourselves, and now we are where we are.
Well, Chris, I wanted to touch on something that you kind of said there. I mean, I think it was back in maybe 2019, pre-pandemic, you did get attention for a couple of tweets that were critical of certain lawmakers, and I think certainly as someone who goes on social media a lot for work, that's not uncommon. You see that all the time.
Sure.
But I wanted to kind of get a sense, like, take me through your mindset shift from someone who was tweeting things like that to someone who's now running this nonpartisan organization.
Well, it kind of touches on something both of you said, that it is that I was someone who was politically involved. I had my own opinions, and I considered myself slightly above a dilettante. I kind of had an understanding, but not much. And even for someone like me, there were still issues I'd see every day where I'd say, wait, what is that? I just need to know basic, what is that? And when you try and Google something, very quickly, you're in the weeds in terms of, you know, clear partisan perspectives, or maybe not even partisan, just above your pay grade, you know, just too complex to process at an entry level. And I thought, man, if someone like me is having a hard time learning these basic things, how can we, you know, encourage people who maybe miss the political boat in their teens and 20s, which happens? How can you get them back in the fold? Where's the place you can go where you can say, listen, this is a safe place to say, I don't get it. Just give it to me in, you know, more digestible bites. So that was the impetus of the idea of thinking maybe there's a way we can just kind of be the entryway.
Yeah. So that was the basic idea. Mark, has this project really evolved like you've expected it to in the last 4 years? I mean, what have been the obstacles? What have been the surprises?
No. COVID. We were supposed to.
Remember that?
You remember that the great pause. We were supposed to launch at the South by Southwest 2020, which was the first major thing to get canceled. And
Man,
you know,
we were so devastated. This is how funny it is. When they canceled it, before we knew what it was going to be, we were like, this is irresponsible.
This is crazy.
I can't believe they're canceling it. This is going to ruin the city.
And to be fair, I said that, and you know, but we were very happy that, you know, we didn't go. And however, as we got into it, interestingly enough, because of that challenge, we were forced to find other ways to communicate, and people really needed that. And so one of the things that ended up happening, and quite frankly, you know, Chris and I would have also been busier during that year and weren't. Like everybody else, but yet the government and certain other folks really needed to find ways to communicate. So people were actually more open. They didn't use the app in the way that we thought they would. We had actually made an app originally that members of Congress had, and we naively thought, oh, this will be great. They can just upload videos whenever they want. They'll love to talk to us.
There were 2 apps. There's the ASP app, and we made an entire separate app just for elected officials, thinking that they would use it constantly.
So much work.
I don't think they used it once.
No, and then also when they weren't with their staffers, apparently, you know, they didn't have the mechanism to remind them to do some of those things. But what did end up happening, because they were happy to talk to us, is we ended up doing, you know, video conferencing, and then we ended up developing a platform where we could talk to them and record, and that made many other verticals of communication, in Daily Points and Explorers and now eventually Explainers. None of that would have happened. Well, who knows what would have happened, but it wasn't intended to be that robust. And now, I think the last thing we thought we'd be doing would be doing in-person events, and we've now teamed up with great people like Close Up, who's here, and Bridge USA to reach out through their communities, both digitally, virtually, and now we're going to be doing things in person. None of that really was the plan.
No.
We thought we'd create this thing, we kick back, and we couldn't wait for the elected officials to upload some videos.
Well, talk to me a little bit more about your relationship with elected officials, because I understand that when you guys were first sort of starting out here, there were a number of people who saw like Chris Evans and they're like, nah, this is a scam.
We're not talking to
Not
him,
going to
yeah.
respond.
That's true.
Yeah.
But you guys have...
Kaylin, who works with us, she literally thought it was, you thought it was
Kaylin was a comms director for, I forget who it was, but a Republican. And again, Republicans were the ones who didn't want to talk to us. And so it was a real uphill battle. We finally sat down with who Kaylin was working with. And she was so helpful and so educational for us in terms of the way we approached and the language we were using. So much so that Mark was like, should we hire her? I think we should go get her. She's great, and she's, invaluable.
And to speak to someone who actually asked us earlier before the event, they said, you probably don't have that many people that actually, tell you what they actually think.
Yeah.
And
Kaylin
Kaylin
straight
did.
shooter.
So we were like, you know what? We need that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Anyway.
that helped enormously because, again, once you, I think D.C., specifically among elected officials, there's a real tight-knit network that if someone says this is okay, that spreads. So that was the biggest.
Also, to be fair, when we first came to D.C., the website didn't exist. And to give the elected officials...
Tough to say. Go look at this.
It's going to be great. No, we're not going to... you all, I'm sure, as reporters, letting people feel safe to sit down with you to begin with. I'm terrified right now. And so these folks were kind enough to sit down with us without actually having anything to reference and to show that we promise we're not going to, hurt you. And so over time, we eventually convinced them.
Well, when was like the breakthrough moment? Like when was the moment where you're like chatting with lawmakers, you're telling them your idea, you're explaining the concept, and you're finally like, we got something?
Maybe the third or fourth. The first trip here, we were so excited, and we had 3 or 4 days. We were filming in the Senate. What was that room called? Whatever it was. It felt real fancy to us, and we were like, man, we're doing it, man. We're really doing it.
Yeah.
And not one Republican showed up, and we were like, all right, this is going to be.
We only had 4 people scheduled for 17 slots when we got here.
Yeah, and so I think maybe the third or fourth trip, when not only did we have everyone show up for the planned schedule, we were trying to squeeze more people in, maybe extend trips. That's when it was like, okay, I think we're finally finding momentum. And again, that's the site itself, is a constantly evolving thing, as most sites in general are. You kind of have to read what works with the audience. You counterpunch as you grow. But the good thing that we gained in the process was the goodwill and trust of elected officials, and I think that's a hard thing to earn.
And they said to us, a lot of folks like you come to D.C. and you tell us what you think, and you tell us how we should act. You guys are asking us questions. And again, because we're not reporters, we're not journalists, we just wanted definitions and answers, and then we wanted to put it up as cleanly as possible. And over time, other people told their coworkers, no, this is real, and we found... we had a couple Republicans who were some champions of ours, and then they told others, and then, quite frankly, the same on both sides, and then it just didn't matter anymore. And now it doesn't. Quite frankly, this is great. We're the least important thing about our site. We aren't necessary to most of it, which is fantastic. That's been the goal.
But we do appreciate you being here and telling us all about the site. I wanted to ask too, Chris, you mentioned that you really don't see a starting point as being a part of the media landscape.
Right.
I want to see if you could elaborate that a little bit, because obviously it's kind of in line. I'm a congressional reporter. Like, I also talk with lawmakers. I also report what they say. I also try and give details about the bigger facts going on. So talk to me about where you see yourself in the media landscape.
Sure. Mark loves this line. It's a great one. We're not news. We're information. It's boiled down to sound bites.
We with news also like to think of ourselves as information.
Sure. But put it this way, we're not coming from a place that's, drafting long-form information predicated on, previous events where you can walk away with a theory.
We don't have journalists, researching things for months and months and months. We're not embedded like the war correspondents that were sitting next to me at the table.
This is, coming from the neophytes for the neophytes to basically boil it down to most, not just catering to the collective dwindling attention span that we're all subjected to, but again, for those trying to find just introductions, just a basic understanding. That's who it's for, and I think that's how it's slightly separate.
And also it's context, right? So, we kind of try to put context to the news a little bit, and that context happens right now mostly through elected officials directly, and a little bit now by defining some of these things. We do explainers and things like that we work with other folks to help create. But, I think that's the difference. I mean, and again, I think of the things that we've done right, it was naming the site a starting point. Chris came up with the starting point. I believe I was the A. I felt really good about that addition. I came up with the A. The domain was available. That helped too. But it's the right name because we don't think that you should end with what that site says. That hopefully is, again, demystifying it and is a place that people can feel comfortable beginning their journey and then go off on their own and figure things out for themselves.
And how have you been able to sort of make sure that folks know about a starting point, that they can kind of know that, all right, hey, I read this news article and I don't understand what DACA is. I don't understand, why this person doesn't like this thing that seems really good. How have you been able to kind of reach those folks? I mean,
it started out because Chris is really famous, and that helped a little bit. It's
always a plus on Capitol Hill.
That
yes.
helped. That helped.
Yeah.
Yeah, it helped. He didn't charge a lot for the tweets for us. That was really useful. And then, quite honestly, this was surprising to me, the elected officials' audiences. The more they participated and the more the elected officials found they got feedback from participating in the site, the more their constituents began to pay attention to us. And then I'd say the best thing that we've done is, quite frankly, working with other organizations that are committed to this, for many, many years. Again, Close Up being one of them, Bridge being another, and then we've worked with many other news organizations, and we'll continue to. In fact, this year we're going to partner with quite a few different organizations and do some tours and things like that. Those folks that we can provide service to have actually helped us grow our audience a lot.
And I also wanted to ask, just because I went on the site last night, and you guys do have some in-depth topics there. Like I watched the video on ESG investing, and you guys have other things on there like gene therapy, artificial intelligence, gerrymandering, human trafficking. How do you identify these topics, and then how do you go about really sourcing the information?
Right. So the first question, and it grows, right? So, and again, this is where, quite frankly, when you asked where we plan to go, we didn't think we'd be here, and I think we've discipline ourselves, or the team, quite frankly, disciplines ourselves to not trying to, you want to be as instantly topical as possible. But really, we look at the year in terms of the legislative calendar and SCOTUS calendar, so and I'd be curious more to ask you the same question. There are these things that pop up, but I'm going to guess that you have an idea around the time of year that a thing may be newsworthy. And so, we have a very small team, and so we'll prepare information to gear up for that. And then, we have folks who are here who spend a lot of time both figuring out what elected officials are going to be closest to the topic that will talk to us. And they spend a lot of time building that up. And then as you're prepared and then certain things come up, we tack and turn as fast as we can. And again, we work with other groups to help, hold us accountable or help to send to them when we can.
I'm also curious how you guys deal, and again, this is coming as a congressional reporter, lawmakers sometimes intentionally, sometimes not intentionally, do give inaccurate information. How do you make sure as you're sitting down with these lawmakers and doing these interviews and then posting them to the site that you're not putting something out there that is just simply not accurate?
Well, I mean, so, the starting points, which the definitions are all fact-checked, we work with fact-checkers. However, there's information that comes up every day that comes directly from the elected officials, answering a question or defining something. And I think the point is, if I am one of their constituents, I need to know what they think.
Yeah.
It is about hearing directly and taking ourselves out of it. So if the complaint could be from someone that their words were manipulated, they are not. Right? They say what their opinion is or what they think an issue, how they believe it. And quite frankly, people so far, for the most part, don't come to our site for
spouting things that are wildly, and that was a big thing in the beginning, thinking, man, how are we going to navigate
Yeah.
the truth here, you know what I mean? But it really hasn't been the main thing at least, that we've had to navigate.
Yeah, we're not a place for hyperbolic speech. I mean, it's just, that's not what and quite frankly, it's, of the things that's been heartening, youth doesn't want it. Like,
Well, they're bloodhounds for it too.
Yeah.
I feel like young people can really tell when
Yeah.
they're being misled.
Yeah.
What do you mean when you say youth are bloodhounds for it?
I think young people nowadays are more and more aware of this, you know, with the proliferation of social media, and that's actually where most people are getting news these days. I think they're aware of, you know, selective facts and framing information in a way that's deliberately misleading. And I think if you do that once, it's probably in your nature. You'll probably do it more than once, and that's kind of something that a picture starts to become clear.
Yeah.
And I think that'll, you know.
And, you know, again, we have a great team, but they interact with our audience, and we hear what people think and what they want more of, you know. And obviously, like any of you, if you put anything out there, it's a wonderful ground for anyone to plant seeds of not nice things if they want to and have conversations on social media, but the basis has to be pure, and we get really great feedback from the folks that seem to enjoy the information. And so that, as a result, I think, is a healthy mechanism for elected officials to come and speak, because some of the incentives for maybe waxing hyperbole are not there.
I'm also curious, you know, when you ask these elected officials to do this, I feel like so often when they're being asked to speak, it's because they are, you know, with a very targeted audience, they have a very particular message for them. But this is kind of just, you're speaking in an educational role. I mean, do most of them have the opportunity to do stuff like this, like just to sit down and explain an issue straight out?
Yeah, that's.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's why, you know, maybe for a minute, until someone copies us and does it better, they'll still talk to us. But I mean, I will say the one thing, one of the things I think, you know, that impressed us when we started going to DC, and I know this is going to sound so naive, is how busy these people are. And, you know, I mean, this is a lot goes on here, you know, and just, I mean, staying elected and like voting, people, we'd have a vote and then there's a bill and they're running out.
Running out, roll it.
I mean, we should actually have a bunch of outtakes of people leaving, like running away from Chris Evans because they have to go vote on something. Like the amount of times that's happened is probably like maybe only here. And you think, wow, we felt it's important to honor the time because whatever they're doing, you know, it's almost embarrassing that they were talking to us at the time. Now I don't think so. Now I think we really are of service and it's useful. And like I said, we are not as necessary to the process, to them speaking because they want our audience way more than they're interested in us, which is great. But I mean, yeah, I mean, man, they walk really far, you know. It's like 4 or 5 miles a day. They get their steps in. It's crazy, especially the House. It's amazing. Anyway, sorry. I don't know how I got distracted.
I mean, it is a lot of it. You'd be surprised how many of them get lost too. Like you'll find one wandering around, and it's like, where are you trying to go?
Each hallway,
This way.
it is. I mean, literally, it's incredible.
You guys did touch a little bit on the elections, and I think when a lot of us think about the upcoming 2024 election, one thing that's really on our mind is just the level of misinformation that we've seen out there and how that is going to drive in 2024. So just broadly here, what are your goals for the upcoming election?
I mean, so many, and I'm not sure how many we'll be able to address just on the site. One of the things that, specifically one of the sites of ASP is counterpoints, because I do think one of the things that's missing, it's not necessarily the what, it's the how. And, you know, we can all have, there's always been extreme perspectives. There's always been people who are more, you know, who are ready for a fight more than other people. But civil discussions and disagreements, the way we speak to each other, I think is...
And can you talk a little bit about what counterpoints looks like on the site?
Sure. Counterpoints was this idea we had initially where 2 elected officials with opposing perspectives on an issue would each have a chance to go back and forth, but it was filmed in a way where they would film their initial opinion, and then the other person would, you know, in their own due time, they'd watch the original elected official, then they would respond, and this would go back and forth 2 or 3 times.
Again, we made a very complicated, expensive app because we knew they would want to do this just on Sundays and things like that and submit them to us. Apparently we were wrong.
Mark and I are just running down hallways
Literally
trying to get these videos.
Yeah.
But just in an effort to look, it's not even when you watch it, it's almost irrelevant whether you agree or disagree with the opinions. What I think most people take away from when you watch it is, man, that was nice. Watching people speak to each other in a way that at least it feels like, I think sometimes that's what breeds allegiance almost more than what you're saying. It's how you're saying it. Because you believe that this person is a listener, they have respect, they understand, they respect the institution. I mean, it's...
And I believe you have a better chance of hearing the information.
Yeah.
You know, if it's not about one-upsmanship in terms of the of winning the conversation, then perhaps the counterpoint, which is why we don't call it a debate, the counterpoint then is of service to the person trying to understand or figure out what they may or may not agree with. Because, you know, oftentimes they're not that far apart. Sometimes people are, some people aren't, but you kind of really want to hear the information. The other thing, just in terms of the goals for the election, I mean, overall, I mean, I think, you know, 1 in 5 youth that didn't vote in the last election didn't vote because they didn't feel informed enough. And I think if we can at least create a place between our election hub, which has a ton of resources that are localized to tell people almost everything they need to know about, you know, their polling places and issues and things like that, so that you kind of make it easy for them to vote, easy for them to register, and then not feel silly about what they don't know. So there's a place for them to begin to engage. That maybe is the service that we can provide. And then in addition, we'll do different things. As I said, we're going to partner with other organizations to help find other ways we'll be doing throughout the year to find other verticals to...
Sure. Well, you mentioned partnering with other organizations. You guys will both be at the White House tomorrow. Yes. Great organization to partner with if you want to get attention. And you're meeting with dozens of high school students to engage with them ahead of the elections. Yeah. And as you just you guys just laid out sort of the lay of the land on youth voters. But I guess I'm just trying to sort of get even a better sense. I mean, why do you think that a lot of youth voters feel like they're not educated? I mean, they're online. They have all these resources. They arguably have more resources than any other youths in the history of forever. What is it, do you think, that leads them to feel like they can't vote because they don't know enough?
I think it's just the nature of being a teenager, isn't it? 20s, you just don't, you know. I consider myself, I love politics now, but not so much in my 20s. It just wasn't on my landscape. And so that's understandable. I don't, you know, it's understandable. But look, the American story is one of constant social awakening, always, you know, and as a result, that's the youth. They're the tip of the spear. So even though older folks are the ones voting, in a lot of ways, they're kind of maybe the rudder. I know I'm mixing metaphors. I went nautical. But the youth is the bow. You know, they're where we're going. And so the more you can, is the bow the front? It is? Yeah, okay. Yeah. I took a guess.
So they're getting splashed a lot, you know, and that's the thing, with stuff from everywhere. So it's hard to know, you know, but that actually is...
But you need their involvement. You need their engagement. They're the ones that are more emblematic of, you know, where we're going. And so yeah, what did you say in that? 8 million new Gen Z voters this year?
8.3?
That's a big number.
You know,
that's a big number.
Listen, it was a minute ago when I was a first-time voter, and I was always interested in this stuff. But I had other things that were really important to me, like, you know, did Jenny like me? You know, or, you know.
Did she?
Yeah,
No.
Did she? Still working on it, but, you know, or whatever it was, you know, and I think that now there's more information on those other things as well, right? So there's more things for younger folks to be distracted by as well. And again, and that's, like you said, it's a part of growing up. People should do the things that they want to do. If we can use whatever it is we have to create a place where this could be an addition to that, you know, we're not trying to judge folks from how they want to spend their time or where they want to swipe through stuff, you know.
Or just the day you wake up and say, you know what, I should be more involved.
Right.
The first time you say, I should know this stuff. You know what I mean? We all have that moment when you're young. There's some discussion at a party and you say, man, I didn't know a single thing they were talking about. Right. Where do I go? This is hopefully that kind of
And I do care how it affects me. But, I guess I need to know a few things if I want to get involved to have it come back around.
And obviously, I think for both Gen Z and basically for anyone at this point, I mean, if you're trying to find out about these things, you do hit a lot of misinformation out there. Yeah. I mean, just there's a ton. How are you guys thinking about, I mean, I know that you've kind of like created this like safe space on the internet for information, but is there also a role for a starting point to play in sort of combating some of that misinformation in other areas?
I don't know. I mean, listen, you know, like I said, we have extremely hard, overworked team of a handful of people. So to not break them, I don't know that I can give everybody that job as well. But I think we look to branch out in other subjects. You know, we're finding other ways to involve experts that we never did before, and there's some subject matters that we found that it's not maybe best to have elected officials be the ones to break it down, because that we realize maybe makes something that needs information too hot, and it's impossible, or it's very challenging to do that. So we've branched out in that way. We're going to branch out, quite frankly, into other subjects. You know, a natural progression in talking about AI brings people to ask us questions about other things in technology, and we're going to continue to grow in that way. I think we'll figure out, you know, how far we can go based, quite frankly, on, you know, eventually we'll, you know, we've done this ourselves. We'll bring in partners. We'll bring in financial partners, and we'll see how far that goes and who we continue to work with. But I think, you know, I mean, we thought baby steps. I feel like they're at least toddler steps at this point. I don't know.
Yeah, we're getting there.
You know, we'll see how much we can do. But we're very, very, very conscious, again, that we're not you. And, you know, you are held to a very high bar, and we don't want to trip a wire that we can't handle. So we, you know, I think we're in a good lane right now, and we'll grow as fast as we can.
And it does, I will say, also make sense. I know that as a reporter, when everyone has, you know, so much of a demand for their attention, we are told often, write short, write concise, write in a way that folks can really ingest it quickly, which means that I can't spend several paragraphs reminding everyone that the Senate is controlled by Democrats, but you need 60 votes and
Right.
da. And so it seems like it does have a bit of an element of, I mean, do you guys get into some of those basics when it comes to just the basics of the structure of government?
Yeah. Oh yeah, the explainer, and honestly, that was one thing we never even thought about, these explainer series.
Those explainers are great.
Yeah, and people really love them, and you know, they're breaking down, and again, Chris and I get almost no credit in it, and we should. I mean, shouldn't. We deserve no credit. Meaning, like, we have a team of folks that really think about ways and go through a process to, you know, communicate. I mean, I think one of the things we bring to the table is, you know, we are storytellers, and so we try to revisit what we're doing and help work with the team as if we would if they were, you know, any kind of team of storytellers. And these stories are information and sometimes defining subjects, but they really, really work very hard in breaking things down in a digestible manner. And I think that's something we'll definitely grow on because people love them.
I mean, you guys have mentioned a couple times at this point that you really want this, a starting point, to be its own thing, and that you don't want it to be a thing that you guys are at the center of. Can I just ask why? What's your thought behind that?
Well, I think one of the reasons is I've made my opinions known so vocally that you don't want someone at face value to think that we're pushing something. The nature of the site is bipartisan. The nature of the site is information-based and not my opinion. I'm not an expert. I'm not a journalist. I have no right to be in this arena other than as a voter, as an American who wants to just play on the one string I have, which is my voice, as we all should. And I think, I mean, a lot of the things that I think turn people away from politics, aside from the fact that certain issues are complex, we just don't think it works. We think, you know, forget policy, structural things, you know, things like term limits, gerrymandering, things that actually build the mechanism of politics people become frustrated with.
Yeah.
But voting changes that too. Like this voting. It's such an important thing. So any sort of...
But also a word like gerrymandering gets repeated over and over and over again until it doesn't mean anything. It's like saying Smurf. And so you need a place to define that so people can remind it when they see it, oh, actually that is gerrymandering.
Yeah. Well, just creating engagement, creating, you know, a new generation of voters that care, that realize that that simple thing, voting, federal or state level, makes a difference.
Oh, you know what? That's worth saying too. Sorry, you were asking what we're doing in the coming year. You know, we partnered with the National State Legislators Association, and that's been fantastic.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the things, this is for me, you know, and this is not an actual statistic, but I'll tell you, man, maybe half or more of the issues that get discussed boil down to some kind of a state rights thing.
Sure.
And I am shocked that I never thought about that until recently, right? And so now, you know, we have, and so, you know, now we work directly with the state legislators.
You too can send up questions.
And now we work directly with the state legislators, and the state legislators, you know, in a time where, you have 3,100 counties and 2,000 of them don't have a local newspaper. State legislators really need a voice in talking about their backyard. And their backyard now also affects the country, because of the way a lot of these things are going. So that is something that we're actively doing and reaching out to talk to those folks to help be of service to their communities.
And I know that you're working with the National Council of State Legislatures, which is, of course, all of them, but are there any specific states that you guys are kind of honing in on as sort of the
Absolutely
first
not.
test fund?
No, we love all 50 of them.
Yeah.
I also did want to talk a bit, because I think it kind of goes with our discussion about young voters, is the discussion about civic education. I'm a former education reporter. I've written about how a new federal emphasis on math and reading scores meant less emphasis on civics and history. According to the National Assessment of Education Progress, only 13% of 8th graders are proficient in history, and only 22 of them were proficient in civics. Wow. Given this backdrop, the fact that so many basics aren't even picked up at the age where they're supposed to be, how do you really approach young people about learning about their government when there's that lack of education about the basic structure of it?
Partner with professionals.
Yeah, find the people that do it better than you and partner with them. You know, because again, we don't pretend to have all the answers. We surely don't. So it's a matter of finding people who are in that arena, who understand how to reach those people and the best mechanism. They've done all the trial and error. You know what I mean?
Close Up, they've been around for 50 years, and we're lucky enough to connect with them to not just guide us, but to also, help provide things that could be of service to their mission. That way, it's not about what, the big mistake would be suddenly that we sit around and decide what the youth should be learning. That's just not it, you know what I mean? So, but there's people who are, like you said, are committed in that space. So we use whatever it is we have to draw attention to and feed the organizations like, what Manu's doing with Bridge in colleges, and what Mia's doing at Close Up, and others.
So it's not like you guys are going to show up in a classroom one day and start with civics, but you're partnering with groups.
We actually did plan on it.
Yeah, that was the original plan.
Really?
I mean, well, before COVID happened,
COVID.
that was, we were so excited to launch and all the in-person things we could do, because, there are ways you can lean on things like celebrity just to get, some temporary eyeballs, and then hopefully get people excited and, turn on a few light bulbs and go.
A spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down.
There you go. Am I the sugar? Or did I just hear that the way I wanted to?
I also should ask, do you guys have anything, or have you considered stuff on your site as far as explaining the media and journalism? Because I think the media landscape of today is so radically different than what it was even a couple decades ago. And I think there's just so many more people calling themselves journalists and news organizations, but more of a need to be able to really parse through and understand and categorize some of what is being written.
I don't know that it's our place. I mean, we're very careful not to, we're not here to pick apart what other people are doing. We choose to participate in the way that we can, and we use our voice. ASP has it. One of the things that I'm, most proud of is the tone and the voice of ASP. And again, quite frankly, the team is now, if we went away tomorrow, they're subservient to it. It's beyond us in that sense. There's a North Star, and so we're committed to that. But it's not really our place to take apart how other people are doing it. We're hopefully just an additive into the.
But is there a sense of having, say, an explainer for how the media works, or something that kind of helps folks get their foot in the door in terms of really being able to understand the vast context that they have right now?
I don't know if I know how it works.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know. I don't even know if I could speak to how. Okay. I mean, well, there's no denying, I'm sure everyone in this room is held to certain journalistic standards, the integrity of the job you guys do. I'm sure you see how it's completely perverted through social media, clickbait things, these people that are calling themselves journalists on a daily basis. And that is, unfortunately, where a lot of young people do get news.
And on the other side of it, I mean, like I was saying, I think 200 counties have no newspaper at all, not even a daily newspaper, no newspaper. You could easily go back to a Boss Hog type. I might have just really made a dated reference.
Did you just make a bonanza?
No, geez, not that old. No, it's the Dukes of Hazzard.
Dukes of Hazzard. That's still,
Still now slightly embarrassed, but I mean, and I think, gosh, it's tough for the business of media. I mean, we definitely see that, but I mean, I could go through 10 stories 5 stories off the top of my head in the last 2 months of mass firings, of papers going down, and they're all people trying to figure out how to speak to an audience in a way that pays for the people to do all of that work. And so I think we're at an interesting, everything's in flux, right?
Well, you've talked about partners. If you ever want to partner with teaching people more about the media and how to read the news, I know this organization that does a lot with journalists.
Your cookie was slightly better than the ASP cookie, I think, so I'm super open.
We have a couple questions here from the audience. One, how are you funding this, and do you have various public support? How can folks support you?
We have self-funded it to this point. We are now partnering with other folks, and we are beginning to work with other financial partners. It was tricky, especially in the beginning, because part of the original conceit of the site was, well, you don't know where this information is coming from or who's paying for it. So somehow the solution was us.
Just do it ourselves.
But again, as it's grown and to achieve our mission and continue to grow, we will now take on partners. But it's tricky. But it started. But so far we're a non-for-profit in the sense that we haven't made any money. That's about it.
And I will say we do have some time for a couple questions from the audience. I think there are some staffers around who you can pass your cards to. Or feel free to hand them. I see you, sir, with the card. You can feel free to hand it up. No. Yeah. No, never mind. Okay. You guys obviously have the Hollywood background and a lot of ties and connections to Hollywood. So what do your celebrity peers think about what you're doing? And have you seen sort of momentum build inside Hollywood, inside the West Coast, for helping out with some of these initiatives, which so far have a lot of people.
That's always been this kind of ace up our sleeve of when do we make those Hollywood calls? When do I have to start saying, hey, will you come do this?
Soon.
Okay, there it is. Soon. Because, again, the first thing, Hollywood's just like DC. They're going to be timid until they know what they're stepping into. But now, after a few years, I think we have something to point to, and we can say, listen, this is truly bipartisan, it's information-based, it's driven in an academic manner. So hopefully, yeah. Now
we've gotten a lot of good feedback from our peers. People do respect it because they recognize they're tricky waters to navigate.
Yeah, some actors steer clear. Some actors, I know it's not even worth the phone call. But I got a bunch of other buddies that would jump in a heartbeat.
And also, it's important for whomever we do involve that it's in servitude of the mission that ASP has, right? Yeah. And we do, and there are different folks that can bring attention to different things in areas or open up a conversation in pockets around the country. I think that's going to be a really interesting thing to play with. But it's got to be specific and not a gimmick, and so we're figuring that out in pieces as we go.
Can I ask, when you say open up the conversation in pockets of the country, is there a particular spot that you guys have in mind for sort of where?
No, there's just, listen, there's lots of different places where people are from.
Yeah, I was going to say that the tail might wag the dog. Depending upon who would be interested in doing it, you could say to them, well, what are you interested in?
Yeah.
Where are you from? What's your passion?
Right.
What's the thing you want to talk about?
How to go from there.
Yeah.
Well, I know, oh, great, fantastic. Well, I know that we are, thank you. I was about to say, I know that we are almost out of time, and now I feel guilty since everyone just passed up their questions doing it. I will ask just one more quick question. There's a table of Gen Z in the back, if you guys want to chat with them at all about the...
Hey. Hey, Gen Z table.
It's odd that you put them in the back. I guess you have to work your way up.
Yeah.
You guys have
You'll
better
get there.
eyesight.
You'll get there.
You can be back.
How do you currently sustain engagement? Just given that everything moves as quickly as it does. Like, I'm thinking, you talk about news cycles in DC, and it's surprising that it was just like last week, a week ago, we were talking about a shutdown, and now it's on a tax bill, but also immigration, but also Ukraine. How do you really kind of keep up and make sure that people are staying informed when the news in real time moves so quickly?
Look, when there's an influx of information, that's a good thing. Even though it makes a lot more work, we're coming into an election year. It's like owning a snowplow before a blizzard. It's a good time to have this sort of a site. So there's no shortage, I think, of information. It's just, a lot more work for the other folks at this.
And also, we can't do everything. It's one of the reasons why we will grow, because there is the need, and we do feel a sense of responsibility. And there's this, we have this team, and there's a yearning desire to take the thing that we built, which works, and we're very proud of, and throw more at it. So yes, no, we can't hit everything. I think that's kind of the discipline that we've had to learn, which is, if we don't have the resources to be able to deal with that one, something else will be there, and we'll do the things that we do. And so we try to bring the most service we can to the things we cover, and not worry too much about what we can't do yet.
Sure. Well, I know that we do have to wrap a little early today, so I was told around 1:45, which I think we're about there. But before I ask the final question, I got to take a moment to thank the organizers of today's event, Headliners co-team leaders, Donna Leinwan-Legere and Lori Russo, as well as Lori for being today's Headliners coordinator. That is much appreciated. Also, a special shout out to our club events coordinator, Cecily Scott Martin, club membership director, Kate Helster, and of course, our club executive director, Didier Salji. Thank you all for participating in our discussion. And last thing before the last question, it is my honor to present you both with the National Press Club mug. We give it to everyone, all the famous folks who have talked on this stage.
I thought we had to fight for this.
Famous figures, diplomats.
Thank
you guys so much for being here.
And let us just say it's an honor to be your inaugural guest. Thank you for
That's
it.
right. That's
We
right.
feel very special. We
Congratulations.
like to set the bar nice and low, and I hope we've done so with you. And we look
You
forward.
can only go up from here.
Exactly.
And I did want to ask just one final question for you guys. I mean, you've spent a lot of time now in D.C. You spent a lot of time talking to lawmakers. Have either of you guys ever thought about running for office?
There was a time, but
Seems real hard.
Being here, you realize how much goes into it, and I'm tired. I don't know. I don't think so. I think there's better ways to be a part of the world without having to do the work that goes with being an elected official.
Agreed. And in the beginning, this place is amazing, and unlike Hollywood, people come here with dreams of doing something. And one of the coolest things, we got to see people who got elected for the first time and then reelected, and so we've watched them kind of grow into their roles. And most of them, we would always ask them, and Chris did most, and I've done some of all of the initial interviews. We took ourselves out of them. Yeah. And we would always ask them what inspired them to get into politics and what inspired them about politics. And a lot of them would have these great local stories, some wrong that was done to somebody, something, and that was super inspirational.
It was beautiful.
And
it was
then,
really
you know what, maybe someday.
Like, man,
and
these people,
then
good
you
for
get
them.
into it, and you're like, and then there's all of these other
You're like,
things.
oh, this is a nightmare.
And I'll tell you, and I just would end with this, is I know there's a lot of cynicism around government and media, and I think it's important that, you all are doing great work to hold each other accountable. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, I feel very inspired as a result of this journey, and I have an insane amount of respect of the people who choose to serve and who choose to cover those who serve. It's a very challenging thing, and people really, yes, you can judge whatever their motivations you think they are, but there's a lot to dedicate your life to that. So the long way of answering no, because I have too much respect for those that do, and I don't know that I could be down for that journey.
You said that really well. I mean, being in D.C. for those 2 years of building this site, 2018, 2019, being somewhat political adjacent, being somewhat media adjacent, you have so much. Mark, we developed so much. We already had respect, but it just grew exponentially to see how hard it is to do what the elected officials do, what you guys do. And thank you so much for giving yourself to this. It's good work.
Thank you.
Well,
Thanks
thank you so
us.
much for being here. Thank you all. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you again.